Good afternoon, everybody. We have our last talk here of track number 10, Diary of a Detection Engineer, a comprehensive account takeover detection framework. Please help me welcome to the stage Senior Technical Staff Member and Chief Engineer for Emerging Platforms Threat Detection at IBM, Mr. Chris Kulakowski.
All right, how we all doing? Hello. As it says, Diary of a DE. This is my diary as a detection engineer, and I'm focusing on a chapter, specifically a project that I did with my colleagues, and it was a multi-year project where we developed a framework for detecting account takeover. So going along with the Space Cowboy theme, we're embarking on our mission. This is the mission agenda. I'm going to be talking about the background and motivation for this talk and the project itself, like why do we need ATO detection. I think it's important to understand what an account takeover is, so I'm going to go into depth about what we're talking about here. Looking at the modern ATO threat landscape, what it is today, techniques and tools used in ATO attacks, and how they're going to continue on in the future. How we detect ATO, I'm going to give you a list of key signals and approaches to detecting ATOs in your environment. And the best part about this is we're tool agnostic here. I'm not going to be speaking about one specific SIM, one particular EDR. These concepts I'm going to be talking about, you could take to your own organization and apply them with the tools that you have. This project was iterative. So we started with version 1. We realized that there was improvements to be made. We moved on to version 2. Yet again, we could make it better. We moved on to version 3. So I'm going to be going into the iterative approach that myself and my team took to develop this framework and give you some examples of what that looked like. And then lastly, we're going to wrap things up with defensive and preventative measures that we can put into place to stop ATOs from even taking place. We're focused on detection, but if we can stop it to begin with, obviously that's better. All right, so a little bit about me. My name's Chris Kulakowski. I've got about 17 years of experience, started in the area of IT, administration. I did IR. I've been in security operations. I've done threat hunting. And now, sorry, wrong slide. Now I'm in detection engineering. I spend my days writing a lot of detections, many as code, a lot of detections as queries. I'm familiar with 12 plus different query languages, and it keeps me happy, engaged, and I think it's fun. My background, I've been at very large organizations, so that I primarily come from experience having seen a lot of different attacks, working on a lot of different incidents. And that's kind of the plus side to a large organization, is you kind of get to see a lot of different things. And like I said, now my current role is I'm a senior technical staff member, fancy title, but I'm just a detection engineer, essentially, at heart. And I'm specializing in writing detections. I do a lot of attack simulations, adversary emulation, and that ties into the detection engineering work that myself and my team does. So why do we need ATO? And what we're going to be talking about today is ATO stands for account takeover. We're talking about cloud or web-based accounts that have been compromised by an adversary, so unauthorized access. And it's increasing. I wish I had a trend here, but I do actually have, in a slide, I'll have some metrics that will indicate how this is not going away anytime soon. We're also seeing trends in new tooling and techniques adversaries are using that makes it easier to compromise accounts. It's no longer just getting a username and a password to get logged into an account. Now they're taking approaches of hijacking sessions, which are already authenticated, and there is no need for MFA. There's no need for a FIDO key, or multi-factor isn't necessary because the attacker already has the session. And I'll dive into more about how this looks and what these sessions look like. Just trying to make sure I'm on the right slide. Okay. So let's define what ATO is. It's unauthorized account access, usually for the intent of stealing intellectual property, deploying ransomware, maybe stealing additional credentials, moving laterally to source code in the environment. Whatever the motive is of the attacker, it kind of varies, but their immediate goal is to just gain entry, right? And that's what they're doing with trying to obtain access to the account. The most commonly targeted platforms include social media, email, cloud portals, developer tools, banking, fintech platforms, and obviously collaboration tools like Office 365. So I'm going to be focusing more on the enterprise side of things today. Not too much in like social media. There are a lot of tactics out there to get like access to Facebook, Twitter, and things like that. But for the sake of today, it's going to be mainly enterprise-based accounts we're talking about. All right, so here's our key metrics, just to weigh the importance of a detection framework like this. 80% of security breaches involve the misuse of credentials, highlighting major cybersecurity risks. We've got AITM, adversary, in the middle, sometimes commonly referred to as attacker in the middle, phishing toolkits. And there was 22,000 adversary in the middle based phishing domains detected in recent campaigns throughout 2024, and that increased to 2025. These numbers are from the Verizon data breach report most recently. There was the Octopus campaign, and which stole over 10,000 credentials using the adversary in the middle kits targeting Okta customers. Shortly, we'll be talking more about the use of these adversary in the middle kits. There are several. Some of them are actually open source, and I'll talk to you about how we can use that for testing our detections. Okay, so when we're talking about these sessions that can be stolen or compromised, let's get into the weeds a little bit about what that entails. A session is typically implemented as a JWT, which stands for a JSON Web Token. And that JWT is usually found within a cookie in your browser. So the attacker could obtain that cookie, use that cookie on their own adversary-controlled environment, and they would essentially have access to whatever you were just authenticated to. And I'll show you what that looks like more in just a moment. How they get these cookies, various different ways, but basically the adversary needs to sit somewhere in the middle between the victim and the portal that's being logged into. So they could do this by eavesdropping on a Wi-Fi connection that's insecure. They could create a rogue access point, such as airports are commonly used to do this because everyone at an airport is typically looking for free Wi-Fi. So they go to look for free Wi-Fi, they connect to it, and they don't realize that it's usually some rogue access point where an attacker has a backpack full of equipment that they're just sitting and they're collecting login sessions for people that are connecting through their access point. They've got all these other session hijacking techniques. They can be attained through web application vulnerabilities like cross-site scripting, malware that's been deployed to a compromised website, proxy interception, and they can be reused within the same browser to hijack other sessions. Info stealers are what we most commonly see how these are compromised. A lot of people think info stealers, well, it's just stealing credentials saved in the browser. Maybe it's doing a endpoint scan for passwords saved in plain text. But these info stealers like Redline, Raccoon, and Luma, they actually support session cookies as well. So they can capture the cookies, they can exfiltrate them to the adversary's infrastructure, and now the adversary has those cookies, given that they're valid for whatever time frame, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, they can access the environments without any MFA, no password, anything. They can just re-authenticate with those cookies. Okay, so these adversary in the middle kits, like I said, some of them are even open source. One in particular that I'm most familiar with is Evil Jinx. It's out there on GitHub. You can go download it, install it into a Linux box, and you can create fishlets, host an Office 365 login page, and you can start logging in and testing what it would look like for a session to be compromised. And there's a tool that I'm going to recommend in just a moment that'll help you simulate this kind of attack. Other examples of these toolkits are Evil Proxy, Tycoon 2FA, Murena, and there's several adversary as a service actually offerings where you can go on the dark web, you can pay a couple $100, and basically you get delivered a domain of your choice that's some kind of login page that you're trying to capture sessions to, and then you just take that and you start phishing your victims with it. So it's actually becoming more readily available for attackers to have this infrastructure in order to steal these sessions more easily. Another method that we've seen in the past is fake or malicious Google ads that will actually redirect a user to a legit looking login page, but obviously it's not legit. And the victim would log in and it would be proxied through the actual login page. So if we're looking at the top example, that's Google. They may actually authenticate to Google. Let's say they're trying to access Gmail. They would put in their username, their password. The toolkit authenticates the user to Gmail, and during the authentication process, the adversary compromises the session, and the user is now redirected to their Gmail. So it's not like in the past where it might be obvious that you just got phished and your password or username and password were just compromised. Now with these adversary in the middle kits, it's no longer obvious. They will be redirected to the actual login portal, which could be their Gmail, calendar, whatever, and they would have no idea that their session was just compromised. I've got a diagram in just a moment to kind of explain how this looks a little bit more. The bottom is kind of a similar example. This one's just with phishing. So you get a phishing email. It says you need to verify your account. It's not asking you for any information other than, so review your recent activity, and it takes you to a page where it wants you to log in to verify your account. They're not actually going for your password in this case. They're attempting to steal your session because the adversaries know that passwords are only go so far these days. Everyone's got MFA, they've got two-factor, and they're actually trying to get the sessions. So this is what it might look like if a user's phished. They get the email, they click on the link from the email, it takes them to a website that says, log in to Office 365. They put in their username and password. They authenticate successfully through Microsoft Intra, and they're taken to their login, their Outlook inbox. Yet, during the authentication process, the cookie was stolen by the adversary, and now the adversary can replay that cookie on their system, and they have access to that exact session that was authenticated. So that's what it looks like. These cookies come in all different shapes, sizes, forms, names, and this is a cheat sheet to indicate which cookie for which platform or service has the exact token that you would need to log in or impersonate the authentication. So I'm most familiar with Intra ID, and you're looking at the ESTS auth and the ESTS auth persistent cookies. For the other platforms, you've got Google, AWS, Okta, GitHub, and Google Chrome Sync. And these are the other cookies that an adversary would write a fishlet for to extract and obtain that session. So this is a fantastic tool that I love to use. It's called Cookie Editor. It installs into your browser as a plugin or a browser extension. It's written by a Google developer, but it has nothing to do with Google. He just wrote this extension. It's extremely lightweight. It's very fast. And what it's good for is essentially you can copy the cookie from your logon session, go over to your system that you're trying to emulate the attack on, let's call it your attacker system, and paste the cookie. Remember, it's a JSON object. Paste that cookie in on your adversary system, and you would basically click like OK. And it would put that cookie into the browser, and you just need to refresh that login page, and you'll have access to the system. Now, what this tests is a number of things, and I'm going to go into more signals here in just a moment, but it tests what it looks like from a telemetry perspective when you see a cookie used on different systems. So your user agent changed. Your IP address may have changed. Why would a cookie be reused on two different operating systems? One might be Windows, one is Linux. That's very unusual. So these are signals this is telemetry that you can generate and you can use to build off your detection. So let's start to get into more of these signals. That's kind of the next thing here. The telemetry that's generated from some of this stuff, this is an example from Intra ID. And what I particularly want to call out is the session ID that is highlighted here. And this is what you would use if you're investigating an ATO, because this session ID is going to track all the activity that was performed on the compromised account. You're going to see the legitimate login from the victim. You're going to see the cookie reused and replayed by the adversary. You'll see another logon. The session ID is going to remain the same. Then you'll see things like the activities the attacker performed. They may have had access to OneDrive and they were accessing files. They may have gone into Outlook and they started accessing mailbox items. And these are all audit log events, right? So all of this is easily tracked, and you could start to build your detections based on this telemetry that's generated. Key thing here is the session ID, because we're going to come back to that. That's kind of the important component here that's generated during your testing. All right, so diving into the signals. I'm going to break down the key signals here. So we have our user behavior anomalies. These are things like unusual application access. This user's never accessed this application before. A first-time access or a first time using a certain authentication method. Like maybe the user always uses Google Authenticator to punch in their number or something. But now we see them using a different authentication method. It's changes like that we want to key off of. We've got geolocation irregularities. Things like a new region. We've never seen the user log in from this region before. We've got a new ASN. We've never seen them log in from AWS or from Google Cloud. They've never logged in from this VPN anonymization service. We've got device and network anomalies, things like a new user agent. And I know these sound like impossibly noisy, like a new user agent. User agents change all the time, but I'll explain why this is important and how we can kind of sift through the noise that some of these signals generate. A new ASN, new device. So let's say your asset management system shows that the user is registered to a Windows 11 device, but we see them log in on a Mac. They don't have a Mac registered. So depending on your corporate policy, are unmanaged devices allowed? Should that be considered normal or potentially a good signal to detect upon? So that's one key signal, is a different OS that they're typically logging in from. Network-based signals, we've got our VPN and anonymization services. I've seen enough of these ATO attacks. They're always coming from some kind of infrastructure to anonymize the attacker. Even consumer-based VPN services. I'm a Nord user. I see attackers using Nord. We also see them using cloud providers, AWS, GCP, Azure. Obviously, DigitalOcean is a very popular one. So those are things that they could be noisy by themselves, but in conjunction with these other signals we're talking about, we're really getting somewhere with painting a story of like this account's likely compromised. Like I just mentioned, cloud. Do you expect logins from a VPC to Office 365? Like generally, people are accessing Office 365 from a workstation. So it's very unusual where you see VPC involved, CDNs, or cloud hosting providers with logins to these work and collaboration tools. Logins from bad IPs, this is kind of a no-brainer, but it's a really good signal to correlate. And then obviously cookie reuse. We were just talking about seeing the same cookie, the same session, but on two different operating systems. That's highly unusual and is a really good signal for correlation. All right, now this is my comprehensive signals list. I gave you the key signals. Those are like the top 7. But this is like everything that we do to correlate together. And they've been really good at giving us a confident way to identify an account takeover. So some of the stuff I've already talked about. We've got the same session ID with 2 different user agents, 2 different regions. Impossible travel can be typically noisy, but we do see it as a signal in true positive account takeovers. Azure Intra ID has its own out-of-the-box risk detections. In my environment, these are extremely noisy, but they do a really good job at identifying anomalous properties that we've never seen for that user before. And we love correlating those risk detections with these other signals. They make a really confident detection. Things like mailbox sensitive keyword searches. If you ever see a mailbox search for like password or key or token, that's a good signal. Now developers do that a lot, so that's why it's a signal only. We wouldn't detect on it by itself, but it's a good signal to correlate with as an ATO in the ATO framework. Multiple failed logons, that one's good because sometimes we see the session compromised and it takes a minute for the adversary to successfully use it. So they'll do what I was kind of explaining where they'll paste the cookie in to a cookie editor or cookie editor-like tool, and it might not refresh the authentication page the first time. They might need to change their browser. They might need to switch over to a different operating system. And so we do see a lot of failures sometimes before they actually get the successful authentication. So that one's good. Risky logon source, we talked about bad IPs. That's a no-brainer. Anonymization services. Login from Tor isn't really, Tor it hasn't been used very much recently. We saw that a few years ago, so it was a good signal at one point, but I think attackers have kind of moved away from Tor because everyone's blocking it. EDR alerts are an excellent signal to correlate to. Like I was mentioning about malware sometimes compromising the session, if you have a low-level EDR alert that Defender might say it's cleaned or remediated, they can bubble down to like an informational or low severity, and your SOC might never triage it. Yet we've seen some of those remediated events actually be successful before it was blocked by Defender, where the attacker obtained the session and actually got the session from an info stealer, and the EDR reported that it was remediated. So EDR alerts are really good signals to correlate these other identity-based alerts with, especially EDR alerts that are lower on the severity end. If you're automatically triaging highs and mediums through your SOC, then I wouldn't really correlate them here, but if you're not triaging informational and lows, it's good to add them here to the signals list. Another thing we've seen is MFA methods created for the user. So the attackers know that this session is short-lived. It might expire, depending on your corporate policy, it might expire in 12 hours, an 8-hour workday, maybe 24 hours. So they'll often try to maintain persistence. They might have your password, but that password's only good with MFA. So they would go in and they would create a new MFA device. We've seen MFA devices added with some phone number that's not the user's, or some Proton email address that's obviously not the user's. So that's a really good signal to correlate with, is a new MFA method added under the user's account. All right, moving right along. Now we'll get into the actual framework and how myself and my team approached this problem. So like I said, it was a multi-year endeavor, and we didn't really know much when we started this, so this is our version 1. Version 1 was basically taking our signals and counting how many signals we see for a particular user in some set time. An example might be we set a threshold of 5 of these signals in 8 hours. If we see 5 or more signals from that list in 8 hours, we would trigger like a high severity alert. We'd have our SOC go triage. While this worked well, there was false positives from it. We saw false positives where new users are being onboarded, so they have no baselines. So they're getting a lot of like new anomaly-based signals generated on their behalf. A new user agent, a new device, a new MFA method, sometimes impossible travel when they connect to VPN for the first time. And all of this, there's other things as well. It led us to the conclusion that we could make this better. Just simply counting the signals wasn't enough. We needed to do something else to increase our confidence of the detection. And that's where we get into, or before we go to version 2, I have an example of what that might look like. Everyone loves Custo, so this is it's a fictitious Custo query, but it kind of explains what we're doing here. Is within 24 hours, we're looking for ATO signals where the rule contains Office 365 ATO framework. And then we're basically, the summarized line is counting the number of signals by the user email address. So like I said, if we saw 5 or more of those signals within this time frame, we could define our severity and we could trigger a SOC alert. So this would be an example of version 1. Now we're getting into version 2. We realized that just counting the signals wasn't enough. We wanted to put a weight or a score to each signal. Some of these signals were more important in the framework than others. Some of the signals we see more frequently for all of our users across the company. Some of them we don't see frequently, but when we do see them, they're a really good indicator that we've got something we need to investigate. So this led us to the idea that we needed to apply a score to every signal and then add up these scores to indicate our confidence level in the account being taken over. So that's what we did. And this is what that query might look like. These queries won't run. They're fictitious, but I just used it as a demonstration for rule logic, basically. So you could have a list of all your signals, and you could have a score, defined for each signal, and then on your summarized statement, add up the scores. So during that period that we're concerned about, in this example, it's 24 hours. We might see that a user has an ATO score of 450. Okay, and what are the scores here? So high is 300. So let's say they have got a score of 450. That would be a critical, basically, and it would be calculated based on the scores of the signals that we saw triggered for that user. So this worked really well. This framework is, it's pretty much what we're doing today with some other advancements as well. But the scoring methodology seems to work much better than just simply counting the signals. And this is pretty much the backbone to the ATO framework that we're using at my company. But we realized there was one extra thing we could do to just make the investigation side of this easier, because investigating an ATO is rather complicated. You're pivoting across multiple data sources. You're reviewing, you're scrolling through logs and logs, and you don't know what you're looking for. You're not sure what's the victim and what's the attacker. So we needed some help. And that's where our version 3 has evolved to, where it's AI assisted, LLM assisted. And unfortunately, our prompt and everything's proprietary. I can't share that, but I can explain how you would go about creating this. You basically need to provide master instructions for your LLM or whatever you're using to do the step-by-step analysis that a human would do. So, and it needs to be detailed. So you would have section by section what a human would be doing, and have that LLM go do those tasks for you. So let's say the first step is just understanding the user. We might have instructions in the LLM to go query our asset management and find out what device is managed or what devices are enrolled for this user through the MDM or whatever your asset management is through. Where are they typically logging in from? Where is that user based? You could look up their LDAP record. You could see if they're based in an office or if they're home. Are they a contractor? Are they a full-time employee? There's a lot of context you can get from just knowing what the user, what their role is, where they're supposed to be working, etc. That's like one step in the master instructions for this LLM. Then you give the LLM the next step. Let's say that's let's go query the identity logs, okay? And by the way, the input to the LLM is obviously the ATO alert. So your ATO alert is going to have a list of all the signals. It's going to have the score. It's going to have some other things like the speed, if it's impossible travel, the geolocation information. So you want your LLM to go use that context from the ATO alert and pivot to the actual raw logs and do some investigation that a human would normally do on the raw logging. And the final result for using LLM is essentially like a, I think I had a note. It's going to be an incident narrative for what took place, how it began, what they first saw, why is this even concerning, where did the victim start from, what are the suspect locations, IPs, or devices that are in question. And that narrative is what the SOC analyst uses to base their decision on whether or not they need to take action. The extra component to this is the agentic nature of using the LLM. So if the LLM decides that this is a high likelihood of a compromised account, then there could be an agent that goes to strike out that account, go reset the password, go revoke the sessions. In our experience, these agentic actions are very not invasive to the user. Striking out an account, the worst that comes of this is the user gets logged out, they have to log back in. They really don't have any impact. There's not much impact to business when you're talking about these agentic type actions. But it can be very beneficial to stopping an attacker, to exfiltrating data, or doing whatever they are trying to do within minutes of detecting the ATO. And then lastly, the future step where we would like to be is allowing the agent to actually decide if we even need a SOC ticket. In most cases, the agent kind of leans more towards compromise, which is a good thing. But when it doesn't, and it decides this is benign for whatever reason, maybe it knows based on context, like a knowledge base that we provided, that this is maybe some VPN associated activity, or the user's coming back from some extended leave based on an LDAP record, then the agent could close it out automatically and would never escalate this to the SOC. So where we want to take this is basically having the agent decide whether or not a SOC ticket's needed as well. And now let's talk about the defensive and preventative measures. Token protection, and I say if supported because I think it's a beta with Microsoft at this time, and Okta and some other identity providers, they might have something similar, would be really useful here. It's basically tied to the device, so it doesn't allow reuse. And it mitigates this problem altogether. So that's something that you can definitely enable. I think there are some things to be considered with enabling token protection. Like I don't know, there's some nuances with applications that are also using token-based authentication on multiple devices where it could break the application. So it's definitely a policy or feature that needs to be tested in your environment. You can configure risky sign-on policies. For example, I talked about Tor earlier. That's kind of a no-brainer sign-on policy. You can create a policy that just says, if it's a Tor node, just don't allow it. And you can do similar things with risky sign-on policies based on the risk detections that I mentioned as a signal earlier. Those intra-ID risk detections can actually be used as a trigger for not allowing a sign-in attempt. The MDM device policies, so maybe your organization can implement a policy where the device must be managed. In my organization, it's very difficult because we're so large, but if you're only going to allow managed devices to access internal resources like Office 365, SharePoint, and other things, then it makes your life a lot easier when detecting ATOs, because then in your logs, you just need to look for unmanaged devices and call it a day, along with these other signals, but at least that's a really good indicator of something that might be wrong if you always expect managed devices logging in. Blocking consumer-based VPNs, that's a difficult one for a company like the company I work for, but maybe in yours, that can be a no-brainer. Hardening email gateways, so that's looking at the delivery aspect of this. If you can block potential phishing where these phishlit URLs are being delivered, that can prevent this altogether. And implementing a risky user policy. So maybe your executives or finance departments, maybe they have some policy that puts them at a little stricter controls. Maybe their session validity time frame, maybe make that shorter for them, a couple hours, where they have to re-authenticate and validate a new session. Whereas for low-risk users, you could maybe extend the risk a little bit more and have a larger tolerance, like 24 hours until that session expires. These are the Microsoft-provided, this is Microsoft-provided guidance on how to defend against account takeovers. So I can't take credit for any of this, but one thing that I really wanted to call out that I liked, the conditional access policies, those can be really helpful in blocking certain logons. So you can block based on impossible travel, you can block based on VPNs. So there's a lot of default conditional access policies. If you go into your tenant, you can just start turning this stuff on in like a log or monitor state to see how it would impact you before you actually implement it to block the logins. On the detection side, like I mentioned, the risky detections from Entra ID. They do have some out-of-the-box things that you can use. They're not 100%. I wouldn't be sharing this presentation if I said that everything from Microsoft worked 100%. There are some things that slip through, and it's gotten much better. A year and a half ago, I remember every week working an incident, and we were collaborating closely with vendors, letting them know that their product missed something. It's gotten much better today. There's a lot less things being missed, but it's still not 100%. I wouldn't rely on it. And then the last one, protect against replay. So IP allow listing, deny access for non-trusted IPs. That might be something easy. And token protection, we already mentioned that. But that's a good feature to look into because it kind of prevents this from the beginning. These are some of the out-of-the-box Microsoft detections. I love these as signals. They're really good indicators that something has been compromised. Some of these are high severity anyway, so they might bubble up to your SOC or your defense your network defense team anyways, but not all of these are. Impossible travel, I think that's like a low severity intra alert. There's another one that we use quite often. The anomalous token is a really good signal. It just basically means that a token's been used with some unusual characteristics, maybe 2 different devices, 2 different user agents, 2 different regions. So that's a good signal to look into correlating with other things. I wouldn't alert on it by itself unless you're a small organization and you can do that. All right, and then lastly is just building resilient detections. We always, as detection engineers, want to make robust detections, thinking about the future. And the nice thing about an ATO framework is it's behavioral based. We don't know what's to come tomorrow, the new tool, the new exploit, the new threat vector that adversaries are using. And what's nice about having an ATO framework like this is it's based on the behaviors. It can be reused, and this is going to likely help identify account takeovers regardless of how the attackers are doing it 5 years from now. Red teaming, haven't talked too much about that, but it would be nice to do like a purple teaming exercise. We did this ourselves. We built the framework, and then we started to do some traveling around the world. We used VPNs, and we would go to Switzerland, and we'd go to Africa and Australia, and we'd log in different places, basically simulating the telemetry that we want our detection framework to detect. And teaming up with a red team might be also helpful if you have a red team to make sure that your detection framework is working as expected. And that's all I have. Thank you.